Welcome. This is a time set aside to affirm something that's very basic, and that is the story matters. Your story, my story, everyone's story really matters. And so we are here to try to encourage you to do this. And we have a great person to be with us. And Marilyn Taylor McDowell is here, and we want Marilyn to talk with us about her experiences as a storyteller. And so it's nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us, if you will, how did storytelling kind of creep into your life or take over your life? Or what are some of your earliest experiences with storytelling?
I grew up in a large family. There's 7 children, my mother and father, of course, and lots of aunts and uncles who would drop in. And it seemed like we were always gathered around the kitchen table or the picnic table or out on the porch. But there were always stories. There were stories told about past experiences or funny things that had happened, and they just kept going and going. And one storyteller would be talking and another would jump in, and before you knew it, everyone was howling with laughter. And I was basically an observer, watching all of this and learning from it, mostly learning about a history of my mom and dad and what they did when they were children. And that was I think the very, very beginning. And I do remember when the day that I learned how to read. I still remember this moment when those words on the page made a picture in my mind, and it was like some kind of magic. And I remember looking down the row of students this way and looking down the row of students that way and thinking, why isn't anybody like jumping up and down all excited? Because I just was absolutely thrilled. And from then on, that was it. And these were Dick and Jane books. But
so
it's still...
What grade were you then?
Probably kindergarten, maybe. And after that, I was surrounded by books. And all these years later, I'm still surrounded by books.
So the whole family participated in the storytelling. Was there any one person that really kind of stood out, that influenced you in terms of storytelling?
Well, I remember my Aunt Eleanor coming over, and I don't think she was really my aunt. I think it was my father's second cousin once removed or something like that, which that doesn't make any sense to me, but I think it was something like that. She would come over every now and again, and the first thing that really caught my attention was that she drove over by herself. And she would sit in the living room and sit back easy in the chair, and she loved to smoke. So she'd be smoking a lot, and she had a very deep voice, and I think it might have had something to do with all the cigarettes. But she would tell of her travels. And I was absolutely fascinated by this woman because she was so independent and she just seemed so worldly. And I remember it was like at a tennis match where I would just be listening to this conversation. I was thrilled by that. She had a very big impact on me. But as far as all my brothers and sisters and my aunts and uncles, it just flowed. There was no like storyteller in the sense where you dress up and tell a story like that. It was just family things and experiences.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So your influence was in those little stories that you just told was both in terms of being with people who became storytellers, who shared their life and their experiences. So in the telling was a big part for you, and that's played out in your life, right? And then the other part of this is with the words, that
Yes.
the words kind of jumped off the page, and you're looking around at all these other students, and how come they're not getting it, right? So therefore the words on the page have been an important part of storytelling. You want to follow
Absolutely.
one of those tracks a little bit and tell us some more about how it has developed in your life?
Well, I would think I could tell you a story about my very first storytelling.
Oh, that'd be good.
I was in the first grade, and Mrs. Foster had, she gave each student a day to come and bring a book in to read to the class. And I remember that it was my day. And when she reminded me that it was my day, I felt absolutely terrible because I forgot my book. And so, trying to be helpful, I told Mrs. Foster that I forgot my book, but I remember the story and I could just tell it to them. And she let me. So I sat in her big teacher's chair with my legs dangling, and all of the students, all of my classmates, all in front of me. And I told them the story of Little Red Riding Hood. And I must have just memorized this Disney book. I'm sure that it was a little 59-cent book that my mother probably got at the grocery store. But I had read it so many times that all I had to do was to see the picture in my mind and see the words on the page. And I basically just read the story by memorization to my classmates. I thought, what a wonderful thing I didn't get into trouble today. And years later, decades later, my mother said, I remember that time when Mrs. Foster called me and said, guess what Marilyn did in school today? And I thought, well, why didn't my mother ever tell me that? But anyway, that was my very first.
Oh, what a great way to get started, because you think about how embarrassing it can become if you don't have your book or you don't have your assignment, and all of a sudden you're the center of attention, but that seemed to feel natural to you.
I think that for children it always feels natural. I think that children are just natural born storytellers, and especially when you're kindergarten, first grade, second grade. I think as you get up into the upper elementary school age, and then especially middle school and high school, you can start to become very self-conscious, and your ego has come in big time. Whereas when you're little, it just comes out so naturally, and I think that might have been where the ease came from.
How does all that connect to something you're doing in your adult life called Everybody Wins?
Yes, Everybody Wins Vermont. Everybody Wins Vermont is a wonderful, wonderful literacy program. What I do as a coordinator at Neshabie School in Brandon is to gather mentors from the community, and these mentors will come into school once a week, and they meet with their mentee, which is a silly word I think they made up. It means student. So the mentor comes in, they meet with their mentee, they go get lunch, and they sit in the library, and they share books, they share stories, they play word games. They basically just get to be a really good friend. And this student has somebody really special coming in just for them once a week.
So they don't have to pass a test to
no,
do
it's
this.
a real privilege for the students. I will get nominations from teachers, and there's always a waiting list of students, and so I try so hard to gather as many mentors as I can.
And it's also the mentors. They don't have to pass a test, right?
Well, the mentors are screened.
Are they screened?
They are screened because they are meeting with children.
Right.
But usually I know all of the mentors that I'm
Right.
encouraging to be mentors. And then you know what? The first time that they meet with the student, the mentor and the mentee may be a little shy. The second time they meet, they might be a little tiny bit shy. And the third time, best friends.
Oh.
And they go year after year. So you're watching this little student from, little second grader, and suddenly they're sixth grade and they know more than you and they're taller than you. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Sounds like a great thing.
Yeah.
That's good. And you work with that on a regular basis?
Yes, I was a mentor for 4 years, a coordinator. This will be my third year coordinating. So I did watch my little girl grow from second grade to sixth grade, and I'm hoping to go over to the middle school and just say hi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
You also work as a presenter, and I can't remember the
the
name of the group right now.
the Children's Literacy Foundation and the CLIF, capital C,
Right.
capital L, lowercase I, and capital F. So the Children's Literacy Foundation is something that Duncan McDowell, I believe that's his name. Oh, I hope I'm not getting it wrong. He started this, and he he really is the powerhouse behind it. It's been going on now for, I believe, 10 years, and they go into rural communities, and most of the kids might be low income, at risk students. And there's a whole group of presenters, and different presenters will go to different schools in Vermont and New Hampshire and very enthusiastically share a book. We might not be reading the exact words on the page, but just really getting kids excited. So you're really basically holding up a book and telling a story at the same time. And afterwards, the children are able to get free books.
Oh.
Brand new free books, and they get to have a book in their own library. And that is just so powerful to have your own books at home.
Is that, say a little bit more about children and books. Why are books so special for a child, and what is that like for a child to have the?
My belief is that when you are reading a really good book and reading a really good story, or having someone reading to you, you learn valuable life lessons. Literacy skills are part of it, but I think you just learn the right way to live, especially if you're reading a really good book with a character who has to go through lots of obstacles, and there's all kinds of things getting in the way of their goal, their dream, but yet they forge on, and hopefully there's a happy ending. And I think that it helps you to see what you might be able to do in your life. And I think too, reading with children who are very, very young, I think just, having this child right here, sitting on the sofa with a good book in front of you, it's all of this coziness, this lovingness that promotes a love of reading. You just associate books with friendship.
Very good. Speaking about books,
Yes.
you do have a book on the
Yes.
table here. You want to tell us about that?
Okay, so this is my book. It's Carolina Harmony, and this is a mid-grade novel geared for 8 to 12-year-olds, but I've been very surprised by how many adults are reading it. It takes place in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina in 1964, and Carolina is a girl who has been orphaned, living with her mountain grandma and doing well until this mountain grandma falls ill and she's taken away, and so she's just becomes this runaway. But really in her heart, she's searching for that family again, for a place to belong, a place to call home. And that's really all I can say, because I wouldn't want to ruin the ending.
Does that come from a background that is in your life, or is that a part of your imagination?
I think that it resonates with lots of people all over the country who have lived in a rural country setting, or lived on a farm or near a farm. And I think a lot of adults find it nostalgic. And I think the stories that I heard when I was growing up, they found their way into the book. Not the same stories, but that the heart of it. The story is a lot about faith and forging on, and yeah.
Good. How long did it take you to write a book?
It took me about, I don't know, maybe 5 years. I was working full time, and so I would write when I could. Then I moved up to Vermont, and my husband said, if you really want to finish this book, why don't you just take a year and do it? So I did, and I managed to finish it, and I was very, very blessed and lucky to have Random House pick it up and publish it, and it's out in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How, when you meet with young people, do you tend to put the emphasis more on storytelling or more on reading?
A lot of times if I go into schools, I focus on the process of writing, and it is all process. Whether you're going to learn a story for a storytelling, or if you're writing a story that you want to be a book or just a project to hand in to the teacher, I try to let the children know that it's all process, and that when your teacher hands back that paper and she has lots of marks all over it, she's not discouraging you. She's saying, this is good. Now this is how you can make it better. And I let them know a little bit about my stories of having doubt or feeling like I'm not going to be able to write this well enough, and to just keep going and finish it, and realize that those voices in your head are not necessarily truthful.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that encourages them. I've had situations where I've finished a talk and there will be a young writer who comes down and very shyly will say, I write songs. Does that make me a writer? And I'll say, oh yeah, absolutely. And other children very enthusiastically will tell me all about their writing and all of the various projects they're working on. And just knowing that I've touched those few writers in the audience, that's really heartwarming.
That's good.
Yeah.
So you've got a hat.
I have this hat.
What happens to the hat when you put the hat on?
Well, this is
what happens to the world when you put the hat on?
When I was researching Carolina Harmony, I stumbled upon a book called Mountain Voices, which was such a gift. I was able to read actual stories of people who grew up in Appalachia and in these Blue Ridge Mountains, and I learned a lot about jacktails. So these are tales that I think you would find all around the world, but they might be called something different. It's the small boy who, seems to be the runt of the litter, or the one who can never do anything right, and yet off he goes, and through his wits, he manages to save the day. Jack and the Beanstalk, or for this Jack, like one story with the Jacktails is Jack and the Robbers. And the last time I was telling this story to my grandson, and it didn't have my hat, but usually when Usually when I tell the story to school children, I have a flannel board, and I will become this mountain grandma. I'm dressed up in my Appalachian outfit, and so I can tell them these stories, these Jacktales. The last time that I told these stories was in a tent with my grandson, and I started to tell him about Jack and the Robbers, how he was supposed to be chopping wood in the backyard, but he didn't really like working, and his mother was baking a pie, and so he went up to the house, and his father punished him terrible, and Jack didn't cry none. But the next morning, he, without even telling his mother where he was going, took off down the road. And the story continues where he meets a bull, and they think he's no good for anything anymore either, and they're going to get rid of him. And the bull starts following Jack. Then they come upon a donkey, and they're going to get rid of him too, think he's no good anymore. Well, before you know it, it's Jack and the bull and the donkey, and they run across a hound dog and a cat and a rooster, and they're all going down the road. Right about now, my grandson says, "I know this story. This is Animal Band." I said, "Animal Band? Oh, whoever wrote that sure took it from a Jacktale." And I thought, that's the way of stories. When I was doing research for a book that has a lot of Scottish background, one of the things I learned was that there's a saying among the Scottish traveling folk, and when you tell it, better it. And I thought, okay, that's how it is. You tell a story, and the next person can tell the story, and hopefully they'll better it, and it will go and go and go.
Yeah, that's an interesting phrase, better it. That must have, that was helpful to you, right? To be able to, working with children, it doesn't mean that you have to tell it in a perfect way or repeat it the way it's been repeated before, or...
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the best way to tell a story is just like when I was in first grade and I saw the pictures in my mind. If you can see those pictures in your mind, you just follow along and tell your story. There's no script. You aren't rehearsed. It's relaxed. And it will always meander, but follow its natural course to the end. And I think it's a much better way to tell stories. It's natural and easy. And each audience that you're with is very different as well. And I think you connect with that audience. And if you can feel that audience, you're more likely to connect with them.
When you're working with a group, do you find that it becomes contagious, that one person starts to respond and other people respond as well, or?
Usually the children are relatively quiet. Little children do have a way of inching up, so they're right at your toes.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Well, that's a sign of respect and interest.
Well, I love that I am looking out into the audience, and I see smiles growing bigger, and I see eyes open wide. And here's one thing I really get a kick out of. In this age of computers and digital everything, and even very young children are so sophisticated in knowing how to work it all. When I'm sitting there with my flannel board and I have these pieces of the story that I'm putting on the board, there's always this look on a few of the children's faces, and finally someone will just speak up and say, "But how does it stick?" And I think, and there we are. Something old has become new again.
Yeah.
After one storytelling that I did for a school up in Burlington, one of the students, or a few of them actually, said, "Can we play with your pieces?" I said, "Sure." Because they wanted to play. Well, before you knew it, they had a whole story all worked out, and they dragged me over and they said, listen to our story. And I thought it was just absolutely wonderful. They had something that they could use, they feel with their hands and put on this board, and very naturally they worked out a whole story. No one told them you must have a beginning, a middle, an end, a story arc, character development. They just knew how to do it.
Yeah. And they, it sounds like they did it together, rather than one person having been on stage and how do you measure the value of that? I mean,
well, I think that the reason it was so easy for them was because it wasn't a lesson. They were just playing.
There was no test on that.
No, they were just playing.
Yeah.
And so that natural storyteller, and we're all natural storytellers. There's been stories forever.
And how about, let's think a little bit more together about this. We have a community group that is just all volunteers. It's all people who like to tell stories. We pick out a theme each month. And the themes vary, and we invite people to come and tell stories. And sometimes we get encouraged because people come, and then other times we get discouraged. A little discouraged because it's small, but it's, in my mind, it's never really failed.
No.
Never really failed. But So, with this television show, we're having a great time talking to people who love to tell stories, but we're also talking to people that we want to encourage to be storytellers. So, what kind of encouragement would you give to people who happen to come across this? You know, since we're not one of the top 100 shows in the world, and who look or maybe look for us, you know. And they say, "Oh, I'll give this a try." And what kind of word would you say to them to encourage storytelling?
I think that probably the best way to approach it would be to sit down, like we're sitting down right now, having a conversation, and I ask a question. Can you tell me about that time that you drove the tractor over the ditch, or the time that you had a pet owl, or something like that? Oh yes, my goodness, I forgot all about that. Well, it was Uncle Raymond, and before you know it, they're telling the story.
Yeah.
I think that would probably be the best way. You know, I've recently become, and I'm thrilled about this, I've recently become the part-time librarian at the Salisbury Free Public Library.
Very good.
And one of my very first jobs is just to tidy up the place. So in tidying up, I found some beautiful, beautiful photographs of people in the community. And I thought, what is this all about? And I started gathering them, and then I found there were stories all printed up, stories to go with the photographs. And this all had been done as part of their celebration for the 250th year. And so I put these all together, and I said, what a treasure. We need to either bind these or put them on the wall, or somehow recognize that we have all of these stories. And they were very, very conversational, and you could really get a sense of the person's personality and how they were raised, and if they were raised in the city or the country. Most were the country. And so you find stories everywhere.
An opportunity to feed and support that memory, and to be listened to. And in my observation from working as storytellers, people who are willing to sit and engage in storytelling, end up becoming really good listeners. There's a connection between being a listener and being a teller. In fact, you have to listen first in order to be a teller. Otherwise, if you're a teller, you just talk, whether anyone's listening or not, you know. And so it's a great gift to me, and I think to others, when we are able to tell stories and to listen to one another.
I'm very proud of you, actually, for continuing with Story Matters at the library here in Middlebury. And I still remember many of the stories that I've heard at Story Matters, and I am making a commitment to be there more often.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, our commitment to the community is that we came up with this great idea that we want to help create a storytelling movement. And we don't want to create an organization per se, but we want to do whatever we can to encourage storytelling to take place any place. So if you're listening, gather 3 or 4 people, friends of yours or people you know, and pick the topic, or just let it happen, or just have a conversation, and pretty soon you'll begin to tell stories, and we'll feel really good that we might have had a little bit to do with that. Thank you, Marilyn. It's been fun to do this morning, and let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely, and thank you, Len, so much for inviting me.
Okay.
It's been fun.
All right. Thank you.